I wasn't supposed to be home that day. At least that's what Lisa thought. 26 years of marriage, and I could see her betrayal coming long before she made her first mistake. But what she didn't know was that her biggest mistake wasn't the affair. It was underestimating me. I closed the front door behind me softly, setting my briefcase on the table by the entrance like I had done 1,000 times before. The house was quiet, eerily so, except for the faint thud of footsteps. Upstairs. My heart was pounding, but my hands stayed steady. After all, I had prepared for this. Months of preparation, in fact. This wasn't some impulsive decision to come home early from work. It was the final step in a carefully executed plan. Looking back, the signs were there long before I admitted to myself what was happening. At first, I chalked it up to a midlife crisis. Lisa had always taken pride in her appearance, but suddenly her trips to the gym became more frequent. She bought new clothes that hugged her body in ways that felt intentional, calculated. I didn't mind at first. I was happy that she was taking care of herself. But then came the girls' weekends. The first one seemed harmless. Lisa and her old college friends had decided to rent a cabin by the lake for a few days. I even encouraged her to go, thinking it would be good for her. But then the weekends became more frequent, and the explanations more vague. "Just a little getaway," she would say with a smile. "You know how we girls are." Her phone, once something she left lying around the house without a second thought, was now practically glued to her hand. She'd angle the screen away from me, giggling at texts that she claimed were from her best friend, Megan. If I asked what they were talking about, she'd say something generic like, "Oh, just gossip." But it wasn't gossip, and it sure as hell wasn't Megan. At first, I didn't want to believe it. 26 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a life we built together, it couldn't just fall apart like this, right? But the pit in my stomach wouldn't let me ignore it. Instead of confronting her outright, I decided to gather the proof myself. I started small. When she left her phone unattended one night, I scrolled through her texts. Most of it was boring, everyday chatter, but one name stood out: David. The messages were short, flirty, and vague, nothing explicit, but enough to set off alarm bells. My blood ran cold as I read the way she talked to him, using the kind of playful banter she hadn't used with me in years. The next morning, I took it further. I installed a tracking app on her phone. It was simple, easy. She wouldn't notice a thing. Within days, I had a pattern. Lunch dates at hotels, secret rendezvous at parks, and long drives to places that had nothing to do with errands. I also checked our shared credit card statements, expensive dinners, lingerie from a boutique she never mentioned to me, and hotel charges disguised as spa visits. The pieces were falling into place, and the more I uncovered, the angrier I became. And then there was David. I didn't need a private investigator to find him. I did my own digging. His LinkedIn profile showed he worked in real estate, and his social media was public enough for me to see that he had a wife and 2 young kids. The audacity of it all made me sick. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more. Pretending I didn't know was the hardest part. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly next to me. Sometimes I'd hear her phone buzz on the nightstand and wonder if it was him. The anger boiled beneath the surface, but I couldn't afford to lose control. Breakfast. She'd smile at me like nothing was wrong, ask how my day looked, and kiss me on the cheek before leaving. I played along, giving her no reason to suspect I knew. I wasn't just waiting, I was planning. I met with my lawyer and reviewed the prenup we had signed before getting married. Back then, I thought it was just a formality, something our parents had insisted on. But now, it was my safety net. The prenup was ironclad, and Lisa's infidelity would make sure she walked away with as little as possible. I also made sure to document everything. Screenshots of texts, locations from the tracking app, credit card charges, all of it was neatly organized in a folder on my laptop. When the time came, I would have everything I needed to blow her world apart. And then, the opportunity presented itself. She thought I would be at a work conference that day, out of town until the weekend. But instead of boarding the plane, I drove home. I parked my car down the street, far enough away that she wouldn't hear me pull into the driveway. My palms were sweating as I approached the house, but my resolve was unshakable. This was it. No more pretending. The front door creaked slightly as I opened it, but the sound was swallowed by the quiet of the house. I listened carefully, my heart thudding in my chest. And then I heard it, the faint sound of movement upstairs. Footsteps, the murmur of voices. I made my way up the stairs, the hardwood floor cool beneath my feet. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I didn't hesitate. I had come too far to turn back now. When I reached the bedroom door, I paused. The muffled sounds of laughter drifted through the door, followed by a whisper I couldn't make out. My hand tightened around my phone as I hit record. With one final breath, I pushed the door open. Lisa's startled gasp filled the room as she scrambled to cover herself with the bedsheet. David was halfway out of bed, fumbling for his clothes, his face a mixture of shock and panic. But I didn't give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I simply stood there, calm and collected, as they realized their world was about to come crashing down. "Don't stop on my account," I said, holding up my phone to make sure they knew. I had it all on record. "I've got everything I need." The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't the time for tears or shouting. That would come later. Right now, it was time to make them pay. I didn't flinch when Lisa's eyes met mine. She clutched the bedsheet to her chest, her face drained of color, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. David was faster, scrambling out of the bed and tripping over his pants as he struggled to pull them on. "What the hell are you doing here?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the thundering silence in the room. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. I wasn't here for dramatics or screaming. I wasn't here to cry or throw things. I had already done my crying in the quiet of the nights when she thought I was asleep. I was here for something else. Closure, revenge, justice, call it what. You will. Without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick stack of papers I'd brought with me. Printouts of text messages, screenshots of location history from the tracking app, copies of hotel receipts, and photos I had taken, of them entering and leaving the same hotel on multiple occasions. The entire sordid timeline of their affair, neatly laid out for her to see. I tossed the stack onto the bed, the pages scattered like fallen leaves, some landing near her, some near David's feet. Lisa's hand shook as she reached for the top page, her eyes scanning the evidence of her betrayal. "This isn't," she began, but her voice cracked. "Don't." My tone was cold, cutting through the room like a blade. "Don't insult me by pretending there's a way out of this." I shifted my gaze to David, who was now fully dressed but still barefoot. He stood awkwardly by the bed, his face flushed with humiliation. "And don't think for a second that I didn't know exactly who you were before I walked in here." David's humiliation. David tried to play it cool, straightening his back and clearing his throat as if he could regain some dignity. He was younger than me by at least 10 years, but in that moment he looked like a scared kid who had been caught stealing. "You're David Preston," I said, my voice steady. "You sell overpriced McMansions to people who don't know any. Better. You've got a wife named Emma and 2 kids, Noah and Sophie, right? Cute family. I wonder how Emma's going to react when she finds out where you've been spending your afternoons." David's jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out how much damage control he was going to have to do. "This isn't necessary," he muttered. "We can handle this like adults." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like adults? You're sleeping with another man's wife, David. That ship sailed a long time ago." He took a step toward the door, but I wasn't done with him yet. "Leaving so soon?" I asked, leaning casually against the dresser. "Did you at least let Emma know you'd be late for dinner? Because she's probably getting the evidence I sent her right about now." His face paled, and for a moment, I thought he might actually pass out. "You didn't," he whispered. "Oh, but I did." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Everything you see here, the texts, the hotel visits, the pictures, it's all sitting in her inbox as we speak. And just in case you're wondering, yes, she opened it." David didn't even bother saying goodbye to Lisa. He bolted out of the room, barefoot and frantic, slamming the front door behind him as he fled. For a brief moment, I stood there, listening to the sound of his car engine roaring down the street. And then it was just us, me and Lisa, left to face the ruins. She sobbed into the bedsheet, her shoulders shaking violently as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. "Please," she choked out, reaching for me. "Mark, I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Please, we can fix this." I took a step back, her touch like poison on my skin. "Fix this?" I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. "You destroyed our marriage, Lisa. 26 years and you threw it away for him. Don't stand there and tell me we can fix this." Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment I felt something twist in my chest. Was it pity, grief, anger? Maybe all three. I had loved this woman, shared my life with her, built a family with her. But the woman crying in front of me wasn't the same person I had married. Or maybe she was, and I had just been blind to it all along. "I love you," she whispered through her tears. "I swear, I still love you. I wasn't thinking straight. It was a mistake." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay composed. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning, Lisa. What you did was a choice. Over and over again, you chose him." My voice dropped cold and unrelenting, "And now you're going to face the consequences." The legal maneuver, I pulled out another set of papers, this time divorce papers. I had filed them weeks ago, but I hadn't served her yet. I wanted her to see them in this moment, when the weight of her decisions was crashing down on her. I tossed them onto the bed, right next to the stack of evidence. "Our assets are frozen," I said, watching her face twist in confusion and then horror. "The prenup we signed before we got married? Yeah, it's still valid. Thanks to your affair, you get nothing. The house, the savings, the investments, they're all staying with me," she gasped, her hands clutching at the divorce papers like they could somehow save her. "Mark, please, don't do this. Don't take everything from me." "You took everything from me first," I replied. "This is just me making sure you don't do any more damage." Her sobs became uncontrollable, but I didn't budge. I had already made my peace with this moment. The final twist, I took out my phone, glancing at the time. "Emily should be here any minute." Lisa's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "No!" she pleaded. "Not Emily. Please, Mark, don't drag her into this." I stared at her, unmoved. "She has a right to know. She's our daughter, and she deserves the truth. I called her before I came home, and she's on her way. If you think facing me is hard, wait until you see the look in her eyes when she realizes what you've done." Lisa crumpled onto the floor, her cries echoing through the room. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of the love I used to have for her, but it was drowned out by the weight of her betrayal. I stood there waiting for the sound of Emily's car pulling into the driveway, knowing that when she walked through that door, Lisa's world would crumble even further. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure she understood the depth of what she had done, and there was no turning back now. I heard the sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway and the slam of a car door. A moment later, the front door opened, and Emily's voice echoed through the house. "Dad? What's going on?" she called. Her voice was filled with confusion, and I could already sense the tension in the air thickening. "In here," I replied, my voice steady but heavy. Lisa sobbed quietly on the bedroom floor, her head buried in her hands. When Emily appeared in the doorway, her face shifted from confusion to shock as she took in the scene. Her mother on the floor, a pile of papers scattered across the bed, and me standing with my arms crossed, watching it all unfold. "Mom?" Emily's voice cracked. What is this?" Lisa lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red. "Emily, sweetheart, I'm so sorry." "No," I cut her off. "Let her see it for what it is." I stepped back, giving Emily a clear view of the evidence. She walked forward, hesitantly at first, but then something hardened in her expression. As she saw the texts, the photos, the proof of her mother's affair laid out like a courtroom exhibit. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered, picking up one of the printouts. Her hand shook as she read through a series of flirty messages exchanged between Lisa and David. She dropped the paper like it burned her. "How could you do this?" "Emily, please," Lisa begged, crawling toward her. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," Emily yelled, stepping back as if her mother's touch might infect her. "You destroyed everything. All those times you told me that Dad and I were the most important people in your life. What a joke." Lisa sobbed harder, but Emily wasn't done. "You threw away our family for some guy you barely know? Was it worth it? Was he worth it?" I stayed quiet, watching as Emily unleashed the pain I had been holding in for months. She said everything. I couldn't. Everything that would have broken me if I had tried to say it myself. It was brutal, raw, and exactly what Lisa deserved. When Emily finally stopped, she wiped the tears from her face and looked at me. "What happens now?" I didn't get a chance to answer before the doorbell rang. David's wife joins the scene. I already knew who it was before I even went downstairs to answer it. Emma Preston had received everything I sent her, and judging by the fire in her eyes when I opened the door, she was ready to burn her husband's world to the ground. "Where is he?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Gone," I said. "He ran out of here with his tail between his legs about 15 minutes ago." Her jaw clenched, and she shoved past me, storming into the house like a woman on a mission. I followed her upstairs, where Lisa was still on the floor, and Emily stood frozen by the bed. Emma's eyes locked onto Lisa, and for a moment, the room was dead silent. Then Emma turned to me. "This is your wife?" she asked, her voice laced with disgust. "Not for much longer," I replied. Emma gave a bitter laugh before shifting her focus to Lisa. "You think you're special? You think you're the only woman he's done this with? God, you're pathetic." Lisa's sobbing started again, but Emma wasn't interested in her tears. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "David," she said when he answered. "Don't bother coming home tonight. Actually, don't bother coming home ever again. I'm calling my lawyer." She hung up before he could respond. She turned back to me and nodded. "Thanks for the heads up." Without another word, she left, her footsteps heavy as she stormed back down the stairs and out the front door. I heard her car engine roar to life, and then she was gone. I walked back into the bedroom, the room feeling eerily quiet now that the chaos had subsided. Emily stood by the window, her arms crossed, while Lisa sat on the floor, rocking back and forth as she sobbed into her hands. "Emily," I said gently, "go wait for me downstairs." She hesitated, but then nodded and left without saying another word. Once the door closed, I turned my attention back to Lisa. Her sobs had quieted, replaced by soft whimpers. I knelt down in front of her, and for the first time since this whole ordeal started, I let my emotions slip through the cracks. My voice wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be. "I loved you," I said, my throat tightening. "I loved you with everything I had. I gave you my loyalty, my trust, my life. And this is how you repay me?" She reached for me again, but I pulled away. "That love is dead now, Lisa. You killed it. You killed us." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stop. "I'm leaving. The divorce papers are there. Sign them. Don't drag this out, because I promise you, the longer you fight, the worse it'll be for you." I stood up, looking down at the woman I had once thought I'd grow old with. "Betrayal has consequences," I said, my voice shaking. "Remember that." I didn't look back as I walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and out of the house. Emily followed silently, climbing into the passenger seat of my car as I started the engine. In the days that followed, I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a fresh start. I blocked Lisa's number, unfollowed her on social media, and told my lawyer to handle any future communication. Emily stayed with me most nights, though she returned to her college dorm during the week. We had long talks, some filled with tears, others with laughter as we tried to make sense of what had happened. Therapy sessions became part of my routine, helping me process the betrayal and the anger that still bubbled beneath the surface. My lawyer kept me updated on the divorce proceedings. And just like I expected, the prenup worked in my favor. Lisa's affair had cost her everything. She tried to reach out to me through friends, claiming she wanted to talk, but I shut that down quickly. I wasn't interested in her apologies or explanations. As I sit in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes I haven't fully unpacked. Yet, I feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The pain is still there, but it's manageable now. I'm not broken. I'm rebuilding. 26 years of marriage, and it all ended in betrayal. But it didn't destroy me. It made me stronger. Lisa may have thought she had the upper hand, but she underestimated me. And that was her biggest mistake, because betrayal has consequences. And I made sure she felt every single one. The future is mine now, and for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to it.